My name's Neville Aitchison. Good evening and welcome to The Book Show. And let me also say good evening to my co-host, John Reynolds. John, how are you?
Good, thanks, Neville. Yourself?
Okay.
You're looking good.
You're both looking good. So, we need to tell you that we've got a little bit of world news for you. We've got that great New Zealand writer, Kate de Goldie.
Kate de Goldie, great writer, yeah.
Yes, indeed. She's on as our special guest a little later. Sad to see. I'm a great fan of Ian Banks, and I'm very sad to see this week he's terminally ill. So that's a great pity. You'll remember probably, I'm in the middle of a book at the moment called Stonemouth, and it's a great read, a gritty...
Didn't he have two names?
Yes, he did. Well, as Ian Banks, he was the gritty writer of human drama,
right.
And as Ian M. Banks, he wrote about the culture, built quite a name as a science fiction writer as well, yeah. He's famous in three ways. First, he is Ian Banks, the gritty novelist, as we said. He is also as Ian M. Banks, he is the science fiction author, and he's written a marvellous book about touring Scotland with his cronies sampling whiskey. Excellent stuff. But a marvellous writer, and very sad to see that he's heading for the last chapter.
But the books live on, and that's the wonderful thing about writers,
Excellent.
isn't it?
It is.
Oh, and speaking of writers, I see Jeffrey Archer's got another book out.
Yes, I saw that. And so you're a Jeffrey Archer fan?
Well, yes and no. I've never read any of the books he wrote in prison. But I guess he was writing for a captive audience at that time, sorry.
Yes, indeed.
I've read quite a few of them. I enjoyed the Mallory book. This was the book about the guy that thought beat Hillary.
Yes.
And he's created a very credible work of fiction. Not that I'd believe it because I'm a Kiwi.
Of course.
But that Mallory beat Hillary to the top. But
we both know that it was Hillary that knocked the bugger off.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It was the bastard, actually.
Oh, was it?
Yes.
Well, there you go.
But he tells a good story.
Yeah.
A very good story. I've read a few of them.
Right.
And they're well worth a read. Good aeroplane book if you're sitting on a plane.
Yeah, I can remember reading some of his short stories, and I remember that sort of easy flow, and it's easy to get engaged with them.
A Twist in the Tail was one of his short story books.
Yes.
They always had a little twist at the end.
Yes.
So he's a good writer.
All right, and he's back into the...
Apparently.
All right, good. So as a writer, how would you categorise Jeffrey Archer?
Skilled at writing a plot and writing very accessible books, and when I say accessible, easy read.
Right.
And I'm not putting it down, that's what he's aiming for.
Yeah.
People pick it up, sit down and read it and thoroughly enjoy it.
Right, John. Thank you. We'll see you again after the interview with Kate de Goldie when you'll be coming back with the mailbag.
Look forward to that.
Okay, see you then.
Good.
And for the viewers of The Book Show, we'll see you right after this break.
If the book you are reading late at night is not helping you sleep, maybe it's time for Sleep by Remy Fairman. This natural product helps you to have a normal and healthy sleep. It calms a racing mind and helps with anxiety. Suitable for men and women. Wake up refreshed and able to remember the story. Available from leading pharmacies and health stores. Is your get up and go gone? With age, our cardiovascular system tends to slow down, losing some of its effect along the way. If you want to live life to the max, then the natural cardiologist-approved product CardioMax is for you. It assists healthy and normal blood flow through the cardiovascular system without stressing the heart. Call 0800 567 800 and ask about the CardioMax special deal.
Kate de Goldie, welcome to The Book Show. Good evening.
Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure. Somebody said recently, Kate de Goldie, national treasure. Is that true, do you think?
I think someone should talk to my sisters. They keep these things in perspective.
So we might just ask, who is Kate de Goldie and where has she come from?
I come from Christchurch. I was born in Christchurch in 1959. I'm the oldest of three girls. But I come from a very large, extended Irish-Italian family. My father's parents were Italian immigrants to Greymouth on the west coast of the South Island. My mother's family are Irish going back to some peat bog somewhere.
Right.
I've forgotten quite where. And I have 42 first cousins, which is a number I like to toss around because it's impressive these days, having that many cousins. Yeah. And so I grew up in very happy circumstances with these cousins living in adjacent streets. We were in and out of each other's houses. similarly on the West Coast, very close to those cousins. So I had a pretty lucky, vibrant childhood.
Reading, writing?
Yeah, reading was a huge thing in my childhood. I mean, I really feel like I'm a child that was built by books. Two things that fed that. One, my father, being the child of Italian immigrants, English as second language for his parents.
Yeah.
I'm sometimes not quite sure how Dad actually learnt English, because they only spoke broken English to him, but they would never speak Italian in the house. At any rate, becoming in charge of the English language was my father's MO. Became a lawyer. But he was an inveterate book buyer. So our house was filled with books. Unusually, in terms of the other families that we knew, we were sort of famous for having a lot of books amongst my extended family. And my mother, also slightly unusually for the times, was a working mother. She was a professional musician, and so she earned some money.
Right.
And with that money, she would buy us books. And she had a very good friend, another musician, who was an aficionado of children's literature, Jenny Zorts. And Jenny suggested Mum start buying me books, because I was obviously a keen reader. And so my perhaps slightly romantic memory of my early years is that on a Friday night, I mean, it's true, but I've kind of deepened the experience.
Yes.
On a Friday night.
The sun was always setting perfectly.
Exactly, yeah. It was a Friday night. My mother would give me a handful of Puffin books that she'd bought at the corner bookshop in Merivale in Christchurch, and I would spend the weekend a happy child. We went to the library a lot. Books were sort of highly privileged in our house. Reading was next to godliness, actually.
Right. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
My father once said to me, which I now think was a somewhat rum thing to say, but he did say to me once, "Could you really ever like someone who didn't read?" And of course the only answer to that was no. So I did tend to think of it as an absolutely required ticket for being human.
The experience that I had was my father wasn't a reader at all. In fact, he used to say that it was something that wasn't done, but my mother was. And so when we were kids, it was lights out early, but my mother brought my brother and I a torch. So
she enabled it.
Strong memories of reading under the blankets until falling asleep.
Yeah. Well, I actually had a nightlight because I was scared of the dark. I think from about some incredible age, like 7. And there was a little orange nightlight, but I would read by that a lot.
Yeah.
And but there was no sense that wasn't a good thing to do ever. And the other sort of big feed, I think, in terms of my storytelling life, is that my mother was an exceptionally good storyteller. In another life, she would, I'm sure, have been a writer as well. She just had a natural interest in the way people behaved and human motivation.
Right.
And so she and her mother, my maternal grandmother, told great stories together, and they would tell the story of our family a lot of the time. So I grew up with that going on.
So the stories were stories of tales from within the family?
Yes, and of course there were heaps of them. So there'd be, aunts, great aunts and great great aunts were a feature of my
and 42
early family.
second cousins.
Exactly. So aunts and uncles, and then the stray great uncles and aunts. The same as many New Zealand families, I'm sure. And with them came many stories of their early lives, and I was fascinated by history and the pinpointing when and where they lived. And there was the stories of immigration. My great aunts and my great grandmother had come out from Ireland, and in the case of my father's parents, there was a really interesting story around them coming. And so that was the sort of starting place for me for story, was family. Well, actually, many of them became the basis for my first book. So when I first started writing, kind of with intent, you might say, I always wrote. But when I sat down to write, when I was about 28, I started writing a story about my grandmother, Kathleen Dora, and because she had lived with us, and I knew her life off by heart, and she in fact had ended up in care in a rest home, and I just wrote about the arc of her life in a 6,000 word short story, and by incredible good fortune, it won a short story competition, at the time, the American Express short story competition, and I won $5,000, and I thought, this is a great gig. And it was beginner's luck.
Yes.
And but it was very lucky, because when you get an endorsement like that, and it was an endorsement because it got published and it got response.
Yes.
Then
So was there a feeling of, yes, I can do this?
definitely, yeah. And now whether that was a faulty feeling or not, I didn't care. You know, I felt endorsed, and so I set out to write a collection of those kinds of stories, an interlinked connection of stories, and that became my first book. Took a long time to write because I literally was an apprentice, you know, so 5 years later the book was finished. Plus I was having little kids.
That thread seems to have followed through everything that you've written, really, that sort of sense of relationship with young people, younger people with older people.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think you can tell quite what you're writing about or what your recurring themes are till you've done a number of books, and by the time I'd done 2 or 3 books, novels, and was talking at different times, and often talking in schools actually, I would start to think about what were the patterns that recurred, and it's always about family one way or another, family or some kind of community. I've written some picture books about the classroom, with a teacher in a primary school classroom, and that's fundamentally a kind of family. And my most recent book, as you know, is set in a dementia unit. There's another kind of family.
Yes.
And it is always about interrelationships. I am quite fascinated by the negotiations of family across the generations, family secrets, things that people don't talk about but are known within a family. And so that's what... There's a great quote from Thoreau, which is, a writer should be attentive to their bone. Know your own bone, what it is, the thing that you keep coming back to. And he says, bury it, dig it up, gnaw on it, bury it again, and for better or for worse, family is my bone.
So, all right, and so that's what you've done. And so all of this going on in Christchurch.
Yes.
And the
early
links,
90s.
yes, the links that you have with Christchurch have remained.
Well, for better or for worse, it's my imaginative landscape, and all my books have been set there. Some generally in that landscape, and it's an interesting landscape, despite what people in the North Island might say. It's a flat city, but it has some very interesting geological things going on. The Port Hills I find completely fascinating. There's the Alps, of course, there's a river going through the town, and the town's built on a swamp. I find it fascinating, and there's lots of metaphorical possibilities in those. But so it's the landscape, and it's its place in the South Island that's important to me, and its relationship with the West Coast. They're kind of my twin imaginative landscapes. But sometimes, now when I'm imagining story, I actually imagine particular streets that it's set in, and sometimes even particular houses. So it's kind of where I always go, which has made it quite tricky in the last couple of years.
Yes.
I was not in the middle, but I was in the beginning stages of a novel when the February earthquake occurred, and it was simply impossible to continue with that novel because the coordinates of the backdrop were all changed. I didn't want to write a novel about the earthquake, but it was impossible to write the novel I wanted to write without the earthquake being a part of it. And look, I still dream. All my dreams are set in Christchurch, and they usually set on little corners. You know, Edgware Village Corner, Merivale, when it really was a village. It's set in places that simply don't exist anymore, or at least their frontages don't exist. They're just not the same. But you know, the imagination's a great thing. It's constantly reversioning or revisioning everything anyway. So, but it's been an interesting thing to kind of grapple with as part of.
And this as well, this is the place that you run around.
Yes. Well, I run everywhere I can. I mean, I travel quite a lot because I visit schools, and I like going to a new town. I was in Hamilton the other day, and one way of sort of getting to grips with the place was to run round the river, which was pretty amazing. But I started running in Christchurch. Running is a great aid to writing because somehow or other it helps ideas form and marinate, and it's good for one as well. So I began running in Christchurch, and when I stay with my sister down there, I go down there often, and I run round the Heathcote River, which is very beautiful.
And I've heard you say before that it's that running round that Heathcote area that led you to your latest novel.
Yeah, I think there are many things that feed a story, and ideas can lurk for quite a while, and I've learnt to pay attention to that. If something keeps coming back into one's head, then it's something worth noting. Of course, one writes things down, but I had for many years wanted to write an alphabet book, and there are gajillions of alphabet books out there, and in order to do it well, you have to refresh the form And I'd known always that I would like to write it as a narrative, but hadn't found what that narrative would be. And in the days after, I was in Christchurch during the September earthquake, and in the days after that, I went running around the river a lot, just as a way of getting back into reality, you know. And in the weeks before that earthquake, our mother had gone into care, into a dementia unit in the Beckenham Loop near the Heathcote River. And somehow or other, the earthquake, my mother's situation, the alphabet book, all came together as I was running. I started thinking about the Beckenham Loop, which is a part of Christchurch, which is really beautiful. I thought how ironic it was that my mother, who's, if you could put it this way, was a little bit loopy, was living in the Beckenham Loop. And I started thinking about, as I had been for a long time, about the mind unravelling and how language unravels in the case of dementia. And I started thinking about the alphabet being kind of ultimate agency of order. What if you put the two together? And suddenly the idea came to me for an alphabet book set in a dementia unit. And that's what created this book.
Yes. And the cracks in the road as well.
Yes, well, there were huge cracks in the road everywhere in Christchurch, of course. And the cracks in the road, I mean, language is associations, and it's sort of life independent of sentences, and communication is so fascinating. And I was thinking cracks in the road, cracks in the community, cracks in my mother's head. It just all started to fuse. I love how that happens. And I've learnt over the years that it will happen, even if you think nothing's happening at the moment, something's going on.
Yeah. So do you have to wait for that sometimes?
No, I think I like to quote Margaret Mahy on this. And, you know, there was a prolific, ingenious, perpetually imaginative and inventive person. But her mantra was, you can't just sort of sit around waiting for stories. She was a working writer who needed to earn a living from it. She said, you must go out into the world and wrench story from it. I really like that. So you have to be, I mean, when I'm in schools and I'm talking to nascent writers, I say there are two things you absolutely have to do. You have to read if you want to be a writer. Secondly, you have to be a noticing person. You have to look and take.
All of that brings us to your latest novel. It's been out a little while now.
The ACB.
The ACB.
With Anora Lee. Yes, it has. It has been out since October, I think. Yeah.
Right.
And it's, I'm not sure if I don't quite know what to call it, whether it's a novel or a novella or a story with pictures. Anyway, it is what it is.
Well, I've read it, and I think it could be all of those things.
Yeah.
It's certainly, it has the structure of a novel.
Yes, it does.
It's not overly long.
No.
And it has extraordinary pictures. Beautiful.
Oh, the artwork by Greg O'Brien. I feel it's really nice when you work with someone else on a book and you feel you can say, isn't this a lovely book, because it's not you who's done it.
Yes.
Greg O'Brien, who is a poet, wonderful artist, painter, has done the illustrations for this. He's also a very well-known curator and writer about art. And while I was writing this book, I thought of him as the potential artist for it and asked him to read the story. And he responded to it really interestingly with pictures that aren't illustrative in a sense. They're not merely replicating what's going on in the story. They're suggesting other readings of the story. They're quite abstract at times. They're beautiful to look at. And he really went with the notion of brain cells and the alphabet and the cogs and wheels and connective tissue in the brain. He's sort of, in a way, putting the brain on the page, I think, but with such beauty.
Kate, it's so lovely that you could be here with us this evening. I'm so grateful that you came in and shared so much of yourself and the new story. So,
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
If the book you are reading late at night is not helping you sleep, maybe it's time for Sleep by Remy Fairman. This natural product helps you to have a normal and healthy sleep. It calms a racing mind and helps with anxiety. Suitable for men and women. Wake up refreshed and able to remember the story. Available from leading pharmacies and health stores. Is your get up and go gone? With age, our cardiovascular system tends to slow down, losing some of its efficiency along the way. If you want to live life to the max, then the natural cardiologist-approved product CardioMax is for you. It assists healthy and normal blood flow through the cardiovascular system without stressing the heart. For more information, call 0800 567 800 and ask about the CardioMax special deal.
Welcome back to the book show, and Kate de Goldie, wasn't she great?
She was. Very impressive. Yeah. It's good to see New Zealand writers up and coming and promoting their books.
Yeah.
I think more and more people are turning to New Zealand writers now, which is great.
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? You and I might be of an age that grew up understanding more of other cultures than we did of our own, because we read things from America and the UK.
Came from overseas,
Yes,
and therefore
exactly.
was better than New Zealand. Yes.
And Kate de Goldie, spiritual home writing in picturing Christchurch as she does so. So we get a glimpse of our own culture. Great stuff. Yeah. And so, anyway, let me ask you now, what have you got for us tonight?
So I've got three. First one is HHHH,
Right.
which stands in German for, I'll read it off here, Himmler's Hirn heißt Heydrich. Himmler's brain was called Heydrich.
Right.
It's about the assassination of Heydrich, who was the ruler of Czechoslovakia under the occupation of Czechoslovakia in the Second World War. And he was assassinated by Czech freedom fighters. I guess he would have regarded them as terrorists. But
Yes, indeed.
it's a fascinating book. It was written by Laurent Binet, or Binet probably, because he's French, and then it was translated into English. And he not only writes about the assassination of Heydrich and some of the background, but also throughout the book he discusses his own role as a writer of what is essentially fiction based on fact, inasmuch as he's putting words into the mouths of the chief protagonists, the chief characters in the book.
Right.
And then he'll stop and say, I wonder if he would have said that at the time. And that's intriguing.
Yes. And do you think it works?
I think it works, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you get a bit of an insight into the writer's mind.
Do you think that I, as a let us say, an average reader would get that? Now, I know that you're a man that's written novels, and you've also written about novels, about how to write novels, but here's somebody who's doing it inside the same book.
I still think people would be interested, because
Yeah.
a lot of people would say, well, how do you go about writing a book?
Mm.
Well, I wonder what a writer does.
Yeah.
And he's got all sorts of anecdotes leading up, just sort of doesn't leap straight into the assassination of Heydrich.
Yep.
And he's got a good sense of humour. Apparently when Heydrich took over, he moved into the centre of Prague, and he had some offices in the Opera House. And the Opera House roof, there was a whole lot of statues of composers. Now Heydrich was an interesting character. He was the perfect Nazi. He was very good at sport. He was a very fine musician. He was also totally ruthless.
Mm.
And on the roof were statues of these musicians, one of whom was Mendelssohn. Now Mendelssohn's a Jew. And so Heydrich decided, well, we can't have a Jewish statue on the roof. And so he sent the SS up there to take down the statue of Mendelssohn. Well, apparently the SS guys arrived at the top, and they weren't sure which one was Mendelssohn. And none of them had the guts to go down and ask Heydrich again. So they looked around, they decided, well, being Nazis, of course, they decided that Mendelssohn must be the statue with the biggest nose. So they started hacking away at the statue of the guy with the biggest nose, thinking he was Jewish. Until one of the officers came up and saw to his horror that they were chopping down the statue of Richard Wagner, Hitler's famous
Oh, right. Yes.
favourite composer.
Well, and yes, Heydrich. I mean, you mentioned the heart, but I remember, perhaps the only thing I remember about him was that he was known as the man with the stone heart, or the iron heart.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, there were several.
Which made him good at his job.
He was the hangman, I think they called him the hangman of Prague. I've got a couple of other notes here about him, but yeah, basically he was an evil sort of a guy. But there you go.
But
he liked his children. He liked his children, and so I'll read you this wee book, this bit here. This was on the day of the assassination, and the writer imagined what happened. In the morning, he ate his breakfast, and his chauffeur turned up. But this morning, Heydrich makes him wait. He plays with his children. I have trouble imagining Heydrich playing with his children. That's the writer, of course. He goes for a walk with his wife in the immense garden that surrounds their house. Lena, that's his wife, probably had to keep him up to date on the work that's being done. The plan is to cut down the ash trees and replace them with fruit trees. At least that's what one writer says in the account. According to him, the Heydrich's youngest child, Silke, told her father that someone called Herbert had taught her how to load a revolver. Silke is 3 years old. but I suppose nothing in such troubled times should surprise me.
Hmm.
So we're moving from the writer's reflection to the actual story. Yeah, fascinating book.
All right.
HHH.
If I want to buy this book, where am I going to find it?
As they say, available in all good bookshops.
In all good bookshops.
I think I got it, I might have ordered it on mail, but it's HHHH.
Right.
Laurent, Laurent, Binet or Binet, depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on, or the English Channel. B-I-N-E-T.
Okay. Laurent, Binet, and a lot of H's.
Oui.
Yeah. Okay. John, absolutely extraordinary that somebody who is so intelligent, so cultured, can turn into a monster.
Yes, because he was a champion fencer. He was well read. He could fly. He had a pilot's license. He even flew in the war until Hitler stopped him because he wanted to keep him in Czechoslovakia. And played the violin beautifully. And yet he was known as the Blonde Beast and the Hangman of Prague because he was totally ruthless. And he had great ambitions. He kept a file on all the top Nazis, including Hitler, just in case he might be able to take over one day.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, extraordinary man.
Yeah.
And an evil bastard, without a doubt. Yeah.
Well, thank you, John, once again. All right. You'll be back next week.
I shall see you next week, indeed.
Indeed. We'll be diving into the world of books once again. You'll bring along the little bag. Out will come the goodies, and we'll have a natter about that.
Indeed. Look forward to that.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, folks, for being here. I'm Neville Aitchison. That's it from the book show tonight. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, good reading.